Pastor Thomas, and of course I'm here with Chris. How you doing today, Chris?
Doing good.
All right, so got a couple things we're going to talk about today. First off, I guess we're going to talk a little bit about the food shortages and some of those things. I'll talk a little bit about just kind of, I guess, what would you maybe call it? A consumer, I guess, culture, right? Where you're just kind of like consuming things and not really paying attention to it or anything like that. Um, and then another topic that I want to get into a little bit here is one that I think is it's getting talked about more, but it's not talked about enough, which is how Christians can want things but don't fall into the into being greedy, right? So the idea here is that there's kind of this idea within the church, at least a lot of times where I've been around, where like it's wrong for Christians to want things, right? So there's a book out called Radical, which is this idea that basically you need to spend all of your resources on something other than yourself. So if like you need to be adopting all these kids, and you need to be giving your money away, that because that's how Jesus is. Like, so the idea of wanting things, wanting a nice house or anything like that, like then you shouldn't do that, right? And the book kind of goes into that, not fully, but that is kind of the general idea here. Is if you're a Christian and you want something, that's inherently wrong.
Yeah, I see way more of that than I'm like, everybody makes fun of the Joel Osteen prosperity gospel stuff, and rightfully so. But I see way more of the, I guess, reaction to the extreme reaction to that than I actually see the Joel Osteen type stuff.
Yeah. And so we're going to talk about that. I guess the first thing we'll talk about right here is the food shortages coming up. Thankfully, one of the big things, of course, is baby formula. You can't find baby formula anywhere. I'm glad that my daughter at this point is not on, she's drinking cow's milk by this point, so it's not been an issue for us. We've been able, so she's out of that phase of her life. But I know for a lot of people, they're apparently having trouble finding it, unless, of course, you go to the border. But then there's a number of other food shortages. Have you seen anything just kind of on your grocery store that's been kind of sparse?
It's been rolling kind of shortages, I guess you'd call it. Like 1 minute they're out of something, one thing, and then as soon as that's stocked up, they're out of something else. Yeah. For a while, I remember I couldn't find any fruit juices. Like there were some, but like there was no real selection, And then I think it was a couple months ago, I went in there and there were signs all over the grocery store saying that wet cat food was out, but not dry cat food. And I don't even have a cat. I just remember seeing the signs everywhere. So yeah, it just seems like it's always one thing. And then obviously if it's something like baby formula, that's a very specific thing that certain people need and can't really be substituted with something else. So that tends to make news.
Yeah. It's, there's a lot of different causes behind it. I'm sure a lot of people, have been talking about it. The big one would probably just be this is still the effect of just shutting everything down. So many places got shut down, and you can't just, like, when you shut these things down, it's not just easy to get them going again.
Yeah, that's, it's like a rolling blackout. As soon as one thing gets fixed, another thing, it goes out somewhere else kind of thing. And that's what you end up with these shortages. As soon as one thing catches up, it kind of moves on to another thing.
Yeah. Now I'm hearing that in the summertime, that's when it's really supposed to start getting bad too. Like when we start getting into June and July, it's supposed to get a lot worse. So there are a lot of issues with the economy. Gas is just insane. I don't know what is it? You're here. It's $4.25 a gallon.
It's about $4.40 to $4.50.
Jeez.
It varies a lot, and I'll be honest, I try not to even look at it because what am I going to do about it? I still need to fuel up my car, so I honestly just try not to pay attention to it.
I don't think I've actually filled up my truck all the way since like 2021. I normally just put in $20-$30 and that gets me what it gets me, and then if I have to come back later on, then I have to come. Like, that's about the best that I can do sometimes.
I do that. I've always kind of done that though, because it's like usually it's like, oh, I need gas, but it's like I'm on my way to work, so So yeah, a lot of times I've always been the kind of guy that just throws in a 20 and moves on, but that that 20 ain't what it used to be.
No, it sure isn't. It used to be because I'll get gas from my wife sometimes, and her car, she's got a Honda, so thankfully it's very fuel efficient. But it used to take about $25 to fill up her car. It takes $50 now. So I mean, it has more. I mean, it really is closer to $20. Like I mean, it was 25 if she was like on E. Most of the time when I fill it up, it'd be about $20. So now it takes $50. So I mean, just insane. Of course, I think it's only going to get worse. I don't know, just where you are. I've heard a lot of people talk about it. I mean, there's just a general kind of disdain. Has anyone been kind of mentioning just the cost of everything and some of the reasoning
Oh yeah,
behind that?
everything's going up, especially food, gas. Electricity shot up. All the basic stuff people need that they can't afford or can't avoid buying is especially what's shooting up.
Yeah.
Um,
Have you heard people
I
talking
mean,
about it at all? Like in
oh yeah, everybody notices it. I mean, I I can't imagine this isn't going to hurt the Democrats, barring election fraud. I mean, you're going to have to tape a lot of pizza boxes on a lot of windows. Other than that, like, yeah, I can't imagine they're holding on to Congress in the midterms.
Yeah, well, they're trying some of this apparently. I mean, we're starting to hear a little bit more about COVID, which is weird in the summertime. That's usually when it tends to go away more. So that is kind of weird. I don't know if they're going to be able to get people to lock back down though.
Yeah, nobody cares about COVID anymore. Nobody cares. Nobody's going to play that game again. I mean, maybe in some like blue cities you can get people to do that, but no, you're not doing that again to most people.
No, it's yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'd hope so. I hope that at this point people have really learned like this was a mistake. And I mean, I'm not saying that locking down ever, but just for the amount that we did, the way that we did it, it just I mean we can look and we're just really paying the cost. And we look around, it's just was it worth it? I mean, is this cost really? I mean, and no, right? I mean, it was based off of these reports. 2 million people were going to die in July of 2020. You remember that?
Oh yeah.
That's what they were saying. Oh, we're gonna have 2 million deaths. And it's like we haven't even reached a million. Which again, I mean, I'm not saying it's again like it's a real virus, but like there's a big difference between in 2022 reaching a million people dying versus 2 million people dying with the first few months of this virus.
Well, look, if you're going to do something like lockdown or something, it better be, the zombie apocalypse or the stand or something. I mean, that's the only time that kind of thing is remotely reasonable,
Yeah. Right, and it wasn't reasonable this time.
This was a bad flu, and you decided we're going to burn down civilization. Well, that's not a reasonable response.
So it's affecting everything, of course. Disney just not doing well at all. It's starting to affect them. Netflix isn't doing good. So there's a lot of weird stuff going on from there. But just I guess just wanted to mention it. I guess we also if you want to got to mention about the one of the different mass shootings that took place over recently. So of course this one's going to get a lot of headlines. The one in Buffalo. If you heard about it.
Oh, I heard a couple things. I heard a little bit of rumblings on Twitter, but
yeah, a commie dude shot up a grocery store, but because he's white, he gets blamed. He gets called a right wing guy.
Yeah, I heard a little bit about it. Like I said on Twitter, but I don't have cable anymore, so I don't catch a lot of news unless I'm going out of my way to look for it.
Yeah.
Which is kind of nice. I almost kind of recommend that to people. I feel like I'm more informed not having the news.
Yeah, I've just seen, a few of the different headlines, like I said, reading it. But yeah, this guy apparently was not even a right winger. Like he was a race identitarian, so he was trying to kill black people. Of course, that's not really synonymous with the right wing. I mean, anybody can not like somebody, but I mean, he said himself he was a left wing guy. Again, kind of former commie. So. But it's
I heard the typical rumblings like, oh, we got to ban guns. I even heard a few people try and beat the violent video game drum again.
Yeah, some of them they're trying to use this to go after Tucker Carlson, I guess. Like, oh, this is someone who listened to Tucker Carlson every night, so we got to get rid of Tucker Carlson. All that's, of course, I don't know. It just doesn't seem, and like, I mean, obviously it's a big deal, right? Especially for the people involved. But I mean, like on the global thing, this thing, it doesn't seem to carry the weight as it maybe it would have back in 2017, 2015. Certainly not like in 2012. Like, do you kind of get that vibe? Like, I just don't think people really care as much.
I mean, gas is $5 a gallon, and you can't find food at the grocery store, and you can't afford it when you do. So yeah, I don't think there's a whole bunch of like issues like this people are going to care about.
Yeah.
We talked about the abortion thing last week, but I even mentioned then, like, I think both sides greatly exaggerated in their head how much the average person cares. Because at the end of the day, like, people gotta put food on the table and they gotta put gas in the car, and
Yeah, in a lot of ways, it's almost
they're
it's
trying to
getting out
live
of the
their
news
lives.
cycle.
Yeah,
I mean, it's sort of getting out of the news cycle in a number of ways. I mean, I'm not seeing it nearly as much. So,
I mean, those sorts of issues, I don't. Again, barring election fraud, those sorts of issues aren't gonna do either side any good come November, because this is going to be more than any election I've ever seen in my lifetime about the economy.
Yeah.
Because if people can't afford food and gas and electricity, then that is going to be basically the only thing on their mind.
Yeah, I think that's the number one issue right now for voters is inflation, which basically is just like the cost of everything. I mean, like, they're saying it's inflation, but I mean, it's basically just, everything being so expensive. That's one of the number one issues. COVID is one of the least ranked issues.
We have inflation combined with shortages.
Yeah.
Like, that's the worst of both worlds. We have too much money and not enough things.
Yep.
That's a bad situation. And I don't see a lot of voters being concerned about anything else than that. If I was running for some office, there'd almost never be another topic I'd even talk about.
So what should the Republicans do to address it? If let's say that, like, the Democrats get blown out of the water come midterm and Republicans retake the House, they retake the Senate, then what?
I mean, you got to cut spending. You got to be ready to deal with the fact that we have this inflation. What I would do is, first and foremost, I would cut military spending. And I know the Republicans aren't going to do that, unless all of them magically turn into Rand Paul. But no more $40 billion to the Ukraine. No more of that crap. Like,
yeah.
There's a way you can cut spending right there. Okay, maybe the government can start spending money on Americans.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's a huge thing right there. You actually let the economy function again and sort things out. That might help.
Would you deregulate?
In a lot of ways, yeah, I would. Sometimes deregulation is more about just giving money to your corporate donors than it is trying to make the economy function. So, I mean, wouldn't just blindly deregulate, but yeah, there's probably some loosening up that needs to happen in certain areas. Cool. Certainly all the COVID stuff, like, that's gone. Like, if I was in charge, it's all right. We're done with that. No more masks. The only thing I'd have is, like, maybe companies gotta, like, let you go get tested and take a sick day and go get tested if you think you have it. Fine. Frankly, things should be a little looser with sick days at companies for the longest time, but that's it. Like, all right, no more masks everywhere. None of that crap.
Yeah.
None of that worked anyways.
No more vaccine mandates.
Yeah, none of that nonsense.
Yeah, that's another thing. It's that's killing that hurt the economy in a lot of ways. Is with all of that, you lost a lot of your workers right there.
Yeah, you're not allowed to have jobs. It's like, well, yeah, you got to focus on those kind of economic issues right now. Nothing else matters.
Yeah.
Man may not live by bread alone, but he sure doesn't live without it.
Yeah. No. Yep. This needs to get addressed first before you can deal with anything else.
Yeah.
So, do you think the
Yeah.
Republicans will do anything if they get in power?
Oh, I don't know. It'll probably be better. The Republicans are always better than the Democrats, but they're very rarely ever good.
Yeah. So, yeah, it'll be interesting. So, but I guess moving on from that, so a topic that you wanted to talk about is this idea here of basically what would you call, I guess, geek culture?
Oh yeah, I was just thinking about a lot of these guys, and it's primarily leftist, but like e-celebs like Spoonie and Movie Bob and stuff like that. Like, I remember a while ago Spoonie talking about how he was reading Tolkien in like second or third grade or something. You know, again bragging about how smart he is as his life crumbles around him. And he's into the Cape stuff, and you see this across the board. I made a joke recently. I was like, why did all these Harry Potter fans turn into that principal character, Dolores Umbridge?
Yeah.
And it just amazes me across the board how many of these people consume all this geek stuff and fail to take in any moral lessons from it.
Yeah.
Like a couple months ago, I saw at one of these. It was the trucker protests up in Canada, and some of the commies that had the counter protest. One of them had a sign with Optimus Prime saying like, "Oh, Optimus Prime would support the vax mandates," and I'm like, okay, first of all, setting aside the fact that you're dragging this argument into what a cartoon robot thinks. I don't know a great deal about Transformers, but I know one of his catchphrases is "freedom is the right of all sentient beings." So that doesn't sound like a pro-mandate guy.
Yeah, it is. It's really weird. And I'm wondering if it's just sort of this, which you can see this on the left and the right, just this, consumer culture where it basically, like, you ever seen Ratatouille?
Mm-hmm.
Where you got like that one, like the brother of the main rat, and he's just like eating whatever, and he doesn't care what it is. He's just shoving it in his mouth, and doesn't matter what ingredients there are, or anything. He's just there to just eat it, right? And I'm wondering if that's how people are with a lot of this entertainment. They're not actually like enjoying it or thinking about it or really trying to get. It's just, let me just consume new thing so that way I can then consume another new thing. It's all about just the consuming and the being a part of the consuming it rather than I really enjoy this.
I used to notice that a lot more with the gaming subculture. Like I notice a lot of my friends that are gamers, the new AAA game would come out and it'd be the greatest thing in the world, and they'd play it for like maybe a month tops, and then they'd beat it and they'd sell it to GameStop and forget it ever existed.
Yeah.
And I just noticed that cycle, and like I don't play that many video games, but a lot of them, if I really like them, I tended to hold on to.
Yeah.
Because it's like I'm going to want to go back to that later. And I just noticed at some point years ago, it's like none of my other friends that were into gaming ever did that. And I get sometimes you got to make the hobby, you got to get a little bit of money back sometimes to keep a hobby going. That's not what I'm talking about. But there was just that mentality where it's like just consuming, just whatever is the latest thing. And then you forget it ever existed. And I don't know. I was never like that. I guess I was the more obsessive nerd, if anything else. Like I was into Cape stuff most of my life, and I would seek out books that would be like, analyzing the philosophy and cultural, roots of these different, the mythos of these different superheroes and stuff like that. I was that kind of obsessive nerd, so I was almost going the opposite direction. But yeah, I there's definitely that consumer culture, but even like you'd think guys that are like paid to like analyze this stuff on YouTube, like that's their job. And yet still so many of them, they don't get they haven't absorbed any of those moral lessons. I mean, Movie Bob famously has a video where he talks about the X-Men. He talks about he thinks Magneto is right.
What?
I'm not kidding. He's like, yeah, the picked on minority should just lash out violently. Like, okay. It's not at all the point of any of this. But
And I wonder if this is people taking their form of entertainment, right, that they enjoy, and almost sort of planting themselves on it. Kind of like, I mean, people can do this in religion, right? Because I mean, you can have some people who can know a whole lot about the Bible, and yet when you look at them, it's like, have you even read the thing, right? You haven't. Again, they have they know all this stuff about it, but they haven't absorbed any of the moral lessons. And so it seems like there's a way that you can just kind of like you can get all of the different characteristics and qualities, the accidents, if you will, of a particular thing without really getting at its essence. So like like Movie Bob or whatever, they look at X-Men and they think powers and costumes and socio commentary, but then it's all of that stuff that's there, but it's very much on the surface, and they don't want to go any deeper than that. The actual lessons, I guess, because it goes against maybe their worldview, it pushes back a little bit. They just kind of block that part out, and it's just, oh no, it's this stuff here, right? And I guess we can see this is that when these people take over said thing, they don't really know what to do with it because they've denied the essence of what it actually is, and so when they try to make something else, it ends up being horrible. Nobody ends up liking it. I mean, again, I hate to bring it up, but like perfect example of this is Star Wars, right? Like the Disney Star Wars movies, that's not really Star Wars. Or you could even talk about New Trek, right? New Trek is not Star Trek. The people making it don't really know what Star Trek is. They've got certain things about Star Trek, like spaceships and phasers and different lingo and stuff, but for what really made Star Trek and what drew people to it, its essence, they just New Trek lacks that, and same thing with Star Wars. It's like this again. It's a skin suit.
There was some behind the scenes thing I saw in Star Trek, and I can't remember exactly what episode it was about, but it was like they had the basic idea of an episode, and they went up to the showrunner who was in charge at the time, and are like, "Here's our idea for the episode," and he stops them right there, and he goes, "But what is it about?" And they really, when they start giving him the plot details, and he goes, "No. What is the point? What is the point of the story? Like, what are you trying to say?" And I mean, I'm not trying to argue that Star Trek always did that. Star Trek certainly had its low points even prior to, the '09 reboot or the
Sure,
Kurtzman taking over. I mean, certainly, all of season 1 of TNG comes to mind. But at its best, certainly there was this like, okay, well, we're telling these stories, but we're telling these stories because we have points. There's things we want to say. And all this external trappings is just the way of saying it.
Yeah.
But we have a point we want to make. We have a question we want to raise. We have something we want people to think about. And you could point to, Star Wars back in the day had a point. The Cape shit back in the day had a point. Pardon my language there. All that stuff had a point. And I guess a lot of people just missed that. Certainly a lot of leftists did primarily. And when they go and try and write it, if they have a point, it's usually something obnoxious and hateful and disgusting. But a lot
it's
of
just
times
completely disconnected from reality. That's the other thing, is that the points, they had to be, human, right? They had to be connected, had to say something about, who we are as human beings. What does it mean to live in this world? And, I would say that would be a problem with, people who are so ideologically driven, is that they're not living in the real world anymore. They're living in theory. They get so mad at the world because it's not how they think it should be in their mind. But the thing is this is the real world.
You can get that with right wingers too.
You can look absolutely.
You could look at most of what passes for Christian movies in the last 20, maybe 30 years. And I mean, I guess, they have a point, but in some ways they have nothing but a point.
Well, right, and that's, I guess, yeah. So I mean, they can have sort of the essence, but I mean, there's a lot of problem with with Christian movies, right? Is that they essentially just become giant gospel presentations, and so well, you just need to be a Christian, and the plot is contrived around that. I mean, to a certain extent, all plots are a little bit contrived, but you know, it becomes very obvious that, God's not dead, right? The atheist guy gets hit by a car, right? And then, he becomes a Christian on his deathbed. I mean, that's kind of silly. It's clear that, yeah, that's not really, the story didn't actually lead in that direction. It's just, well, we want the bad guy to sort of look like he's kind of getting redeemed at the end.
The movie Courageous literally ends with an altar call.
Yeah. And once again, right, these are people who, in many ways, evangelicalism in a large way has taken trappings from Christianity, but they've denied other parts of it, and so they don't get a full picture. I think this is why evangelicalism appeals to a certain group of people, but it just as much repulses another group of people. I mean, obviously the gospel is going to be, offensive to some people. Christianity is not for everybody, right? I mean, it's for those who are called, but this is something that there is something very distinct about evangelicalism. Like I said, it's very sanitized. It's very, family friendly. It's very soft in a number of ways. And that's Christianity isn't always that way. That it has that in there. It can be family friendly, but then it can also be very violent. Judges is not Judges is not a PG book. Corinthians is not a PG book. You have to talk about the thing. And again, real life, the world is not PG.
I'm mostly in line with evangelicals theologically, and almost always have been. But socially, culturally, and politically, I've often found evangelical subculture just be repugnant, just be repulsive. If anything, coming to faith involved first and foremost, figuring out how to separate Christianity from that, figuring out that those aren't necessarily the same thing.
Well, and I'd say that that's part of the problem with evangelicalism, though, is that they have made these two things, theology and I guess, social life, how they live, very distinct. As if, well, here's the Bible and here's our beliefs, but they have very little impact on how we actually live. And so you take that and it can be applied any different ways. This is why you have people who are like, well, on paper, right? Well, we all agree about the same things. We agree about who Jesus is, and we agree about what the gospel is. But I just happen to be a socialist, and you just happen to be a capitalist. Yeah, but hey, unity. And it's like those are very different ways of living your life. And no, one is maybe both are wrong, right? But one of these is definitely, not correct. And they're not really consistent with the faith. You're disconnecting some of the realities of what you say you believe with that. Or again, someone like, David French, Jesus is king, but hey, we got to have drag queen story time. Well, how do you keep those two things together? Well, it's because Jesus is king only in the spiritual world, and that has no bearing on any type of not reality, but anything but the physical realm. It's just only in the spiritual realm. And so again, from that sense, it might as well just be imaginary.
But Tom, we have to send $1 billion to Israel each month.
Well, exactly. See, again, right? That's and again, they can't even keep it straight, right? And this is where it falls apart. It's just inconsistent. There's no basis here, and of course, again, right? Gotta love Bush. And I just think that's
like a cowboy. That obviously means he's a Christian.
Right, well, of course, again, as long as they talk, like Mike Pence, right, great Christian guy, obviously, he's a wonderful person because he's so nice and polite to everybody, and when he's mocked to his face, he's like, well, that's what freedom is. So he's obviously a good person.
My old internet buddy Undertow once he goes that there's a lot of Christians that don't understand the difference between manners and morality.
Yeah.
And I always just, to this day, I think that's just so brilliant. Like, that encapsulates a lot of it.
And so, again, right, there can be Christians who just like there can be leftists, right, who they can watch all of this geek stuff and not really absorb the lessons. There can be Christians who can read over and over again about how these Christian men acted. Jesus going up and confronting the Pharisees, speaking harshly with them, reading what Paul said about certain people, Seeing how David acted at times, right? Read through Samuel, read what God does, and never absorb that into their real life. It's just completely disconnected. Just, oh, well, see, no, but, everything has to be nuanced. Everything has to be real, soft, talk soft, No, no, can't stand strong or firm on anything. No, gentle. We need to, again, LGBT, gotta have pity on them. Can't say that it's wrong. All that kind of stuff. And of course, again, can't don't ever, let your politics be informed by your faith. No. You have to have those completely separate.
When evangelicals do stand strong, it always seems to be something that they shouldn't be, or they're taking it like, I mean, when the James McDonald saga broke, I still to this day think most of them were more upset by the fact that he said a naughty word on camera than, the years of sociopathic abuse.
Right.
Talk to any evangelical about, should we legalize gambling? No, gambling's a sin. Well, can you show me that in the Bible? That suddenly there's crickets. I mean, I know there's some branches of evangelicals where they argue you shouldn't drink, that's a sin. And I'm like, you don't have to have a very deep understanding of the Bible to know that the sinless Lamb of God himself drank and literally performed a miracle so other people could. So I don't know about that.
Right. And again, right here, and because there's such a disconnect, they can't even make the argument that, well, okay, well, you can't find this. Like, again, could you, with gambling, is that something that culture should push? Is that something that should really be allowed? Or is that something that, we should look down on, and that's where you can look and say, okay, well, look, gambling, by and large, it's pretty foolish. Most people don't actually win at gambling. It just sort of seems to be a way of losing your money. And again, there is sort of a sense with this to where, well, why are you gambling? Are you just gambling to get rich quick, right? Well, I mean, again, that's connected to what? The love of money, right? It's not about wanting to glorify God. It's just about getting money there. But they're not even making that argument. They're just, well, just gambling just because I've heard someone, preacher say that gambling is bad. So there you go. Gambling is bad.
Yeah, somebody told them it's bad. They never thought about why.
Right.
They never thought about why it may be bad, why it might not be a problem. I mean, you obviously can't make gambling inherently a sin, because arguably any time you take a risk for potential gain is called gambling.
Right. No, but again, this is the difference.
And then people that just
foolish.
play around, they just buy a lottery ticket once in a while, or they make a bet with friends, they play some poker with friends. That's a lot different than a gambling addict,
Right. No, I mean, again, you have to look at what gambling is, and of course you have to look at, okay, why is it that people gamble, right? If they're gambling because they're trying to get rich quick, the sin is not the gamble, the sin is the love of money. And the sin is, using the resources that you have, basically risking them in this way. Because, I mean, gamble, right, I mean, there is a certain amount of risk, but like, you get in your car and you're taking a risk whenever you get in your car to drive, right? But then when you also, if you get in your car and drive on the other side of the road, you're also taking a risk. But those are not the same, right? They're both taking a risk, but you're definitely being a lot more foolish in the latter example. And I think, again, with gambling, like when you go to a casino and whatnot, there's definitely, you're definitely risking in a much more foolish way than, like if you invest in a stock, or if you're, going out and buying something because you want to try to start a business or something like that. I mean, again, risk is both involved in both of those. So you are kind of gambling still, but in the context when we talk about with casinos, that's much different.
Yeah, when I went out to Vegas when I met Forney a few years ago, and the only gambling, quote unquote, I did was I sat and I played the nickel slots. And that's just because if you go to a casino and you sit and play the nickel slots, you get free drinks. Yeah. So you can basically have $20, $30 worth of drinks for, pocket change.
And I mean, there you go, right? And so it's like it's not about money; it's just about entertainment.
Yeah.
And from there, again, is that maybe the wisest? Well, maybe not, right? But that's the thing. And I think that's where it's again, talking about it in that way as opposed to not just gambling. Gambling's bad.
And I'll occasionally buy like a Powerball or Mega Millions ticket, like maybe a couple of times a year when I see the jackpots up to some ridiculous amount, just because it's fun to buy a ticket and think about what I'd do with all that money. When you have that kind of money, that's like you never have to worry about money ever again. So it's fun to sit around and think, oh, what would I do with that money?
Sure.
And it's the cost of a soda that I certainly don't need in the first place.
Yeah.
So that's a lot different than somebody that's spending $80 a week on lottery on scratch offs. You know what I mean?
Exactly, right. And I mean, that's the thing, is those two are not the same. That's not the same thing, right? And that's the
And
other.
it's like alcohol.
Yeah.
Like there's nothing wrong with alcohol. There's literally, the sinless Lamb of God drank. But there's a difference between drinking sometimes and being a drunk.
Yeah. And again, if you know, or if you have reason to think that, you might get addicted to something, like if you have an addictive personality, or, it's in your history, well then, yeah, you'd want to be a lot more cautious behind it, right? It might be wiser for you to avoid it there. But again, there's a lot of people who don't have a problem with it. Now, again, is this something that I think society should endorse or really promote? No, I don't think so. I don't think it's really the best thing for society. I mean, it's, but again, it's kind of like eating cake isn't the best thing for you, but as long as you're not eating cake all the time, that's not your full diet, and you're otherwise, doing healthy things, well then, yeah, it's fine.
It's funny you should mention that, because how many of these preachers you see up there going on about gambling or
porn,
some sexual sin of some kind or whatever, are like 300 pounds.
Yeah.
Like,
no, that's a big issue, right? I mean, again, self-control, one of the fruits of the spirit, right? Well, okay, you need to control yourself with what you're eating. Put down the fried chicken. Pick up some of them weights. I mean, it's easy to do. But you can do that. So, like I said, I guess it's just something really weird with people, though, right? To where we can read something, we can know it really well, but miss the essence there. I'll give you an example of this. Judges 19. You ever read that chapter?
Mm-hmm.
So that's a pretty infamous chapter, right? That's the chapter where, for those who don't know, you got the Levite, and he goes to get his concubine or his wife. A little bit of disagreement there. But essentially, they go to the province of Benjamin, and while they're staying with a guy, and the city people there basically want to come and rape the Levite because they don't like him, right? And eventually, the Levite kind of like throws out his concubine to these men, and so they essentially rape her to death. That's what happens to her. And so then he when he finds her the next morning, basically dead, he cuts her up into pieces and sends her to each region of the territory of Israel. And this is to spur the Israelites in anger against the tribe of Benjamin, to punish them for the evilness there, right? You read that story, what do evangelicals do with that story? What could they possibly do with it?
Yeah, I can't remember any time I've heard evangelicals talk about that.
I remember looking at commentaries, getting to this part, and there's like nothing. There's no, there's maybe some, well, this is bad. This is horrible that this happens. It's like, what do you do with it? And I mean, of course, the thing is, right, is that this man, this woman here, right, which I think it's probably the better translation is that it was his wife. His wife was unfaithful to him. She left him. And so she committed adultery. And that's what it says. It says she was unfaithful. So she committed adultery. According to Old Testament law, she should have then been put to death. But she wasn't, because in that time, it was a lawless time. The time of the judges is a lawless time. Every region just sort of did whatever they want. A lot of people really didn't abide by the law of God. But she ended up dying, but it's because she fell into the hands of lawless men. And so the message that, in many ways, that's communicated there is that it's better to fall into the justice of God than to fall into the wickedness of lawless men. Because otherwise, again, I mean, she had been unfaithful. According to God's law, she deserved death. But if she had died according to the word of the Lord, it would have been a relatively quick death. But that wasn't her death. She was much more humiliated, suffered a lot more because she fell into the hands of wicked men. So even in God's justice, which a lot of people want to do away with out of a sense of compassion, what it leads to is lawlessness. And when you fall into the hands of lawless men, it's always much, much worse than if you had fallen into the hands of a just God. But you know,
Are you,
we can't talk about that.
are you sure it's not about how you shouldn't gamble
Well,
or say swear words?
it's definitely about how you shouldn't swear.
See, that's what she said. She said the F word
Yeah,
like 20 minutes prior, and that's why that happened to her.
yeah. But and I mean, again, it's another example of just how bad people can get when this is God's. I mean, right? These are God's people, right? So this is at their worst. This is how bad God's people can get when they don't listen to Him. And that's what we do a lot of times is we will reject God's word out of a sense of compassion. Well, let's, we want to be nice to people, so let's not talk about people's weight because you got to be nice. Well, let's not talk about sexual sin because you need to be nice. And all that's doing by not confronting those sins out of compassion and by not allowing the weight of the law to have its effect on people because you want them to feel good is you're just creating more lawlessness. And we can kind of see that in our own world today.
Well, there's also the lack of grace,
Yeah.
which leads people to not deal with their sin, but just gloss over it.
Yeah.
Like, we're not going to talk about the fact that the preacher is 300 pounds. Now, the preacher could get up there and when he's going on about, why you shouldn't have a porn addiction, he can go, and look, I clearly have an appetite that's out of control myself. So I'm talking to myself here as much as you. Be honest.
Sure.
Admit, that you need,
And that's what I mean.
as Paul wrote, Christ came to save sinners, among whom I'm chief. He didn't write Christ came to save sinners, and I used to be that way, but you are. He was looking at himself.
And that's
more than anything
right. And
else.
it's the same issue, right? The preachers there are not allowing the weight of the law to impact their life, so they're not feeling the grace of God, and then they're not communicating that to their parishioners either. Because you don't understand what grace is until you understand why you have it, right? I mean, if I came and told you, hey, good news, your cancer's cured, you're like, whatever, right? But if I tell you you have cancer and you're going to die in 6 months, and then I tell you the cancer, hey, well, guess what? Now your cancer's cured. That makes a big difference, and that's why again it has to be law and gospel. But to be nice, so many times evangelicals will skip over the law, or they'll talk about certain parts, the safe parts of the law that a lot of their people don't really struggle with, again, because don't want to be nice. So then when you preach the gospel, it really doesn't mean anything. Okay, so Jesus, it's bad to gamble, it's bad to do drugs, it's maybe bad to have premarital sex, sort of sometimes, kind of depends on who's around, and it's bad to be gay. But if you do those things, but of course I don't do any of those things, well then Jesus loves you and died for you. But if you didn't do those things, well he still loved you and died for you anyway, whatever that means.
I mean, you could see this in a lot of cases. It's the sins are the things that we're not doing.
Yeah.
I mean, I've heard a lot of preachers, and this isn't as much now that it's become ever so slightly more mainstream and seen as more not just for kids, but I remember especially 10, 15 years ago, you'd constantly see some preacher up there, why are men wasting their time with video games? This is terrible. And it's like this same preacher is obsessed with sports.
Yep.
Probably all of his free time is consumed by it. And it's like, okay, well, maybe someone's playing video games too much, but maybe you're doing something too much.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe you're not. Maybe you're doing it just the right amount. But the point is, I'm gonna look down on this thing that isn't me.
Yeah.
And I'm never gonna pull out the mirror.
Right. And or again, right? I'll look down on these things that I know are not anybody in my congregation for the most part.
Yeah, my boomer congregation of W supporting evangelicals probably doesn't play a lot of video games. So I'm probably not affecting the amount of, tides coming in when I complain about this.
And so all that does, right, is that just, that leads bitterness from the people who are doing those sins, because it's like, well, you're addressing my sin, you're not going to address these other people's sins. So that leads them to become more embittered, their heart becomes hardened, and then you're hardening the heart of the people who are there because they're getting puffed up with pride. So you see, you're just making people worse in your preaching. You're making the people who, again, you're actually trying to tell the law to, you're making them worse by not being honest. And then you're making the people that you're lying to feel worse out of pride. So it's and again, I think that kind of can come down to with the same thing with a lot of the geek stuff. Kind of getting back, I guess, to the original topic, right? Of you know, people can read about the X-Men and read about how, here's this conflict and there are two sides, and then there's this one side trying to sort of, walk in between these two, and trying to, okay, find out, well, where do you really lie in this? But they just sort of miss all of that, and they just, because of their worldview, they want to go completely with, I guess, Magneto. And they miss the point that Magneto's way doesn't work any better than the other way, than the human rights activists or whatever. What are they called? Not a huge X-Men fan.
Oh, there's a couple of different groups that name this or that, but yeah, that's what that's all about. The overall concept there is bigotry, and the moral lesson there is to not respond to bigotry with your own bigotry.
Right.
Like that's the aspirational moral lesson in all this, and that's just not something that's picked up at all.
Yeah. Now, I mean, again, if you wanted to disagree with that, you could say, well, here's a part of this story that, they're not telling because obviously the author has this particular way, but you don't even want to address that. You just want to look, oh, yeah, Magneto's obviously right.
And yeah, Magneto's a sympathetic villain. That's what makes him a compelling villain. That you understand his why he's angry. You understand his needs and his wants. That's what makes a sympathetic villain. And you can understand the needs and wants of a villain while still condemning their actions.
Yeah. You can understand how they get there. And I think that, like I said, don't know a whole lot about X-Men, but I'm wondering if they do that with the humans as well, if they make the humans in some ways sympathetic. Because, I mean, if you think about it, they really could be that way, right? I mean, if there was
the
someone
better writers would do that. I mean, there's certainly reasons to be, if not hate them, to be afraid of somebody that could, knock your house down with their mind.
Right. Someone who could control your mind, someone who could shapeshift into anybody. It's like, well, yeah, it's reasonable, like you said, to be afraid of people like that.
So many of these leftists go on about gun control, but I mean, applying that logic to this franchise, it's like, oh, I have to register my .45 pistol, but the guy who can shoot lasers out of his eyes doesn't have to register.
That actually is mentioned in the first X-Men movie. That very point, the guy's getting in the helicopter. And he's talking about these students. He's like, some of these students have more power than a handgun. And he's like, no, I don't see a difference. I just see weapons in our schools. So he's actually like the senator's making that point as he's.
I mean, that whole speech he gives is an excellent point. Now, yeah, the counterpoint to that is we register weapons, we don't register people.
Exactly.
There's a line in one of the Avengers movies I remember where they talk. I think it was the Captain America one where they're talking about registering superhumans, and he says, where's Banner and Thor? And he's like, they're I don't know. And he's like, well, if I lost 2 nuclear weapons, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have my job anymore. And he's like, they're not weapons, they're people. And he looks at him, he's like, they're both.
And that kind of fantasy thing is what makes it interesting to kind of explore and really look into. But of course, there's a certain part of that to where it's like, we also have to come back and recognize that is fantasy. But again, it's the fact that they have that point there. They're not weapons; they're people.
But at the same time, it's what you don't know where Hulk and Thor are. You don't know where the 2 most powerful beings on the planet are.
Yeah,
you should probably know that.
Right.
Like he's right to be concerned.
Exactly.
You would be concerned in that moment too.
Yeah.
Like that's the point. But no, they don't absorb any of these moral lessons, and it baffles me. It really does. Like they're so steeped in so much of this stuff. And again, you can look at the cape stuff. It's Star Wars, Star Trek, Tolkien, Harry Potter, whatever it is they're obsessed with. And I mean, look, I don't even think Harry Potter is particularly good, but there are moral lessons in it. I talked about that Dolores Umbridge character, and I think that's probably the single most brilliant part of that franchise.
Oh yeah.
That you have this character that's not evil in the sense of the cartoonish evil of the main bad guy, but it's an arrogant do-gooder idiot who is making everything worse with their own self-righteousness.
And a busybody.
And that's very relatable. That is very much a thing
Oh yeah.
that exists in the real world.
Yep, left
Uh,
and right, both left and right can get into that where they've just got to, all those different rules that she ends up putting up and everything. Yep.
and again, it just amazes me how many people grew up reading those books and watching those movies. And I didn't read the books, so maybe it's a little different there. I only ever saw the movies. But that's one thing that stuck out to me in those movies. And very little did stick out. I remember seeing those movies, and at the time I liked them. They were good popcorn flicks. But I don't remember almost anything about them. I remember the overarching plot, and I remember bits and pieces. But it's like 8 of those movies, and like very little sticks out to me.
Yeah.
But that character, that subplot, whatever, I think it just ran through one of the movies. That sticks out to me.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, wow, that rings true. Like, that is a thing that you deal with in the real world.
Yep. Yeah, at certain parts of that movie, they almost kind of do an Office Space thing where she's interviewing some of the people.
Just this smug, self-righteous tool that is doing nothing but making everything worse. And there's no way you could ever convince her of that. I don't think she ever learns a lesson, if I recall.
Nope.
I don't think it ever dawns on her, like, how badly she was met. Because it's just somebody like that, I mean, barring the grace of God, they're just never going to.
Yeah.
It's never going to dawn on them.
And
wait, I'm making this worse.
Well, and see, that's another lesson that evangelicals also have to learn is that some people are just not, again, like you said, barring the grace of God, they're just not going to get it. And so you don't need to treat them like they're going to at that point. Until they show that they have gotten it, you don't need to treat them like they are. We got to keep reaching out, we got to keep doing it. Well, you're for right now, you're wasting your time.
Yeah, somebody like that just needs to be not listened to and not put in a position of power.
Right. Don't pity them. I mean, you can, I guess, pity them, but don't have pity on them. Don't let them get into a position of power, because again, they'll cry out, "Oh, it's not fair. Oh, woe is me." But they have no intention of being fair. They have no intention of being honest or anything. They're just going to abuse the position. And you got tons and tons of people nowadays who are that exact way, to where they have no intention of using the power for any type of good. They just want to have the power so that way they can do whatever they want.
Well, you can't reason with those people, because those kind of people have thoroughly convinced themselves that everything they're doing is for your own good. And that C.S. Lewis quote that the worst kind of tyrant is the one that thinks he's doing it for your own good.
And that's where you've got to have a strong will to say no, and to keep saying no to them. No, no, no. Right? This is not for your own good. This is not for anybody's good. No, you're not. We're not going to let you do this. And I think because evangelicals in large part ignored parts of the Bible where they had to have that strong of will, and they had to actually stand up and say no, because they didn't have that, and so they were again, because evangelicals are very weak-willed.
They really have that authority worship too. I mean, they are the exact kind of people that follow that lady around.
Yeah.
And I don't get that. I've never been that kind of way. I've always been skeptical of authority, perhaps to a fault. So it's not a temperament I can understand, but there's a reason there's a lot of James McDonald's in charge of the church here in America, in the West, whatever. And that's because it's what the church wants to a large extent.
Well, I mean, authority is good, because I mean, again, we do live in a world of hierarchy, right? But it's it has to be people who are God honoring for it to really work. When you have evil people in positions of power, it's not good. But to me, the answer is to not just get rid of all of the power; it's to reform the positions and to get godly people into this. I mean, you see this in Samuel, right? Samuel's son, or not Samuel's sons, Eli's sons, are horrible priests. They're stealing food from people. They're taking from what belongs to God and eating on themselves, and everybody hates them. Everyone's like, your kids are just the worst. They're terrible. But the answer is not to get rid of the priesthood and just tear down the entire system there. The idea is to get these guys out of there, which God does. He causes them to die, and then he raises up Samuel to be an honorable priest. And
well, I mentioned a couple of shows ago, I think, that we need people of different temperaments. Like we need to balance each other out in that way.
Yeah.
And there are people with my temperament that are very skeptical of authority. And again, I will freely admit I am probably that to a fault. But a lot of the evangelical church probably needs a couple more guys on my bent speaking up a little bit more.
No, they do. I agree, and I think that's that equal push and pull keeps it, because if evangelicals go too far with rejecting authority, you end up with rejection of all authority, and that's the thing. And so it becomes anarchy at that point. And to me, anarchy is more akin to chaos. So because God does call for us to order creation. There should be an order in place. And if you're going to have that order, there has to be then a kind of a hierarchy. So people should have a respect for authority, but it has to be authority as God's defined it, and the people have to be acting in the way that God's caused them to act. So someone, a king who plans out every little move of your life, that's God didn't give them that authority, right? I mean, that like what our government's doing right now, they're acting way outside the authority that God's given them. Which is, why our government in so many ways is tyrannical. And the people in the government are corrupt. They're godless, a lot of them. They, even though they claim to have faith, many of them don't. But government itself is not an inherently bad thing. People, I think, need that. And again, you see that in the scriptures. There needs to be this understanding, because otherwise you do end up with a lot of the chaos like you have in the book of Judges. That's why it's a common thing where they say over and over again, in those days, there was no king in the land of Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And so it's just nothing but, chaos a lot of the times.
Yep. Yeah, I'll agree with that.
But anyway, we might have to postpone the next topic here about, how can you want things and not fall into greed. We might have to do that next week. So we'll probably pick that up next week. I think we're getting out of time for this one here. But like I said, if you have any comments or topics you want us to talk about, comment in the show. What do you think about this, though? What do you think about why people can absorb a lot of these kind of things, absorb a lot of entertainment, watch all the Cape stuff, watch, Star Wars, Star Trek, Indiana Jones, all this stuff, but not really get any of the actual lessons from it? And same thing for Christianity. Why can people be heavily involved in Christianity, read the Bible over and over again, and yet not get some of the very clear lessons in that? So... any other thoughts?
No, that's about it for this week.
All right. Well, guys, hope you've enjoyed listening to this. So, Chris, as always, thank you for being on.
Yep.
All right. Well, guys, I'll let you go. Hope you have a fantastic week, and talk to you later. God bless.